everyone, I am Bianca Ilacad.
And I am Elsa May Guatnong.
And we are here to discuss world literature featuring African literature and Philippine literature. And now, let's talk about African literature. African literature is made up of literary works from the African continent consisting of works that are either oral or written in different Afro-Asiatic languages and various genres. Traditional written literature, which is limited to a smaller geographic area than is oral literature, is most characteristic of those sub-Saharan cultures that have participated in the cultures of the Mediterranean. In particular, there are written literatures in both Hausa and Arabic created by the scholars of what is now northern Nigeria, and the Somali people have produced a traditional written literature. There are also works written in Ge'ez, Ethiopic, and Amharic, two of the languages of Ethiopia, which is the one part of Africa where Christianity has been practiced long enough to be considered traditional. Works written in European languages date primarily from the 20th century onward. Modern African literatures were born in the educational systems imposed by colonialism, with models drawn from Europe rather than existing African traditions. But the African oral traditions exerted their own influences on these literatures as well. African literature ranges from oral literature to literature written in colonial languages, French, Portuguese, and English. Oral literature, including stories, dramas, riddles, histories, myths, songs, proverbs, and other expressions, is frequently employed to educate and entertain children. They additionally serve to remind whole communities of their ancestors' heroic deeds, their past, and the precedents for their customs and traditions. Essential to oral literature is its presentation and oratory. Folktale tellers use call-response techniques. A griot, or praise singer, will accompany a narrative with music. Some of the first African writings to gain attention in the West were the poignant slave narratives, such as the interesting narrative of the life and adventures of Olaudah Equiano or Gustavus Basa, the African, 1789, which described vividly the horrors of slavery and the slave trade. As Africans became literate in their own languages, they often reacted against colonial repression in their writings. Others looked to their own past for subjects. Thomas Mafolo, for example, wrote Chakra, written in 1931, about the famous Zulu military leader in Susuto. The history of African literature is a combination of reality and fantasy, contemporary world and history, myths, heroes, and metaphors. For myths, it is made up of gods and creation, and it is an embodiment of significant emotions like the hopes, fears, dreams, and nightmares of people. History is a story about their people, their institutions, and their community's way of thinking how the events happened in the real world. For hero, it is an everyman, moving through a change, a transformation, and so moving into the myth, the essence of his history, in which he or she is the main character. The first of the literatures in African languages are Ethiopian. It is made up of Ge'ez, Amharic, Tigrinya, Tigre, Oromo, and Harari. For Ge'ez literature, it is a domain of small portion of the population, and for Amharic, it is used for political and religious purposes. Examples of these are Kebra Nagas, or Glory of Kings, and Ta'amra Mariam, or The Miracles of Mary. The second is Hausa, in which the first novels that made up its literature were the result of a competition launched in 1933. It is Muhammadu Bello's Gandoki, made in 1934, and it talks about struggles against the British colonial regime. And the second one is Amos Tutola's English language novel, The Palm Wine Drink Card, which is made in 1952. Some of the important writers in African literature are Chinua Achebe, which was known as the father of African literature. He is the author of contemporary classics such as Things Fall Apart, which was written in 1958, and No Longer at Ease, which was written in 1960. He was also a perennial Nobel Prize candidate. We also have Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which was part of a new generation of African writers taking the literary world by storm. Her works are primarily character-driven, interweaving the background of her native Nigeria and social political events into the narrative. Her works are Purple Hibiscus, which was written in 2003, and Americana, which was written in 2013. We also have Maria Maba, one of Africa's most influential women authors. She is known for her powerful feminine texts, which address the issue of gender inequality in her native Senegal and wider Africa. One of her most notable works is So Long, a Letter, which was written in 1981. In here we have other famous authors and their works. For our next slide, let's proceed to Philippine literature.
Let's proceed to our next topic, which is Philippine literature. Philippine literature is literature associated with the Philippines from prehistory through its colonial legacies and on the present. The diversity of richness of Filipino literature evolved side by side with the country's history. This can best be appreciated in the context of country's pre-colonial cultural tradition and the socio-political histories of its colonial and contemporary traditions. There are reliable records for four main periods of Philippine history: the pre-colonial period, the Spanish period, and the American colonial period, and the contemporary period. Lastly, the Filipino writers and their works. First, Noli Me Tangere was the most controversial and widely known novel by Dr. Jose Rizal. Next, we have another famous masterpiece in the Philippine literature by Francisco Balagtas, Florante at Laura. It is written in the form of awit, where there are 4 lines per stanza and 12 syllables per line. Next, Mga Ibong Mangdaragit, or Birds of Prey in English, was written by Filipino writer and social activist Amado B. Hernandez. Next, being one of the most admired writers in Philippine literature, Nick Joaquin was recognized as National Artist of the Philippines for Literature in 1976 in historical novel entitled The Woman Who Had Two Navels. Next, on a novel by F. Chanel Joses. It is the first book in the Rosales saga, which tells stories about Rosales in Pangasinan in the Philippines. Banaag at Sikat, or From Early Dawn to Full Light in English, has been dubbed the Bible of the Philippine working class. Being among the earliest novels written by Lope K. Santos, considered by Filipino critic Teodoro Agoncillo as one of the most important books in the Philippine history in 1949. Next, we have Ilustrado. This novel was written by Miguel Sayjuco, landed him a spot on the 2008 Men Asian Literary Prize, being awarded the grand prize. Dekada 70s by Lowell Hattie Bautista. The Marcos era in the 70s is a dark chapter in Philippine history. F.H. Batacan's Smaller and Smaller Circle is in the first Filipino crime detective story set in the Philippines. Lastly, the ABKKBSNPL Ako by Bob Ong is spelled in the texting language. The title of this book phonetically reads, Aba, nakakabasa na pala ako, which can be translated as Wow, I Can Read Now, written by an anonymous Filipino contemporary author whose pen name is Bob Ong.
African literature is not only important only because of its relevant setting and relatable storylines. It also increases our social consciousness, and it raises awareness also like social, political, and economic crisis that the African continent is facing as of this moment. Language of the African novel is highly enriched with some aspects of oral literature such as songs, proverbs, and narratives. The other aspects which makes African literature so unique is from the other novels is characterization. And also lastly, in the novel, characterization is achieved by reporting the thoughts of the characters. So that's what it makes it more unique and important to other sort of literature.
What I've learned in this blog is we managed to dive deeper in African literature and as well as the Philippines. I also seen some amazing authors and literary theories in both countries. And in conclusion, I can say that every country has its own history and life before it becomes a country that we knew today, which regards every author's literary piece. And I think this project seeks to discover the world's literature, which could be a great source of knowledge for students to study a country historical times.